My name is Jackson Binion. I'm a blacksmith out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and today I'm going to be showing you how to forge your very own handheld punch from the Shred Fabric. Now, before we get into the actual process of forging out this handheld punch, I want to talk a little bit about the significance of the stock size and the significance of the steel mainly. So this is just 5/8 of an inch round stock cut at 18 inches. It's my preferred stock for making punches because I can get 3 to 4 punches out of this 18-inch bar, and it is it's thin enough that you can get a comfortable hold on it without a glove, but thick enough that it's not going to slip through your hands and be all fumbling when you're wearing a glove. Now let's talk about the significance of this steel. It is called H-13. Now what that means to my knowledge is it is the 13th variety of a hot work tool steel. It's the most commercially available hot work tool steel and the most commercially liked, as far as I can tell. Now, what that means is it's a steel that is specifically engineered and designed to hold its hardness and shape under hot work applications, which makes it perfect for punching and punches. I've even seen some small anvil faces made out of it, or just anvils in general made out of it, because you're resting a big piece, perhaps a hammer blank, on your anvil face. It's bound to get hot, and you don't want your anvil face to be changing shape or losing hardness, which is why H-13 is a perfect application for that. I've also seen it used for the bottom dies of a power hammer. Let's say, once again, you're moving some hammer stock and you're resting the ridiculously hot piece of steel on this bottom die right there. The bottom die is bound to heat up. You want it to hold its shape and its hardness. Now this specific stock is going to be made into a punch that it will be used for punching the eyes of hammers. I've been getting into hammer making a lot recently. As a matter of fact, the camera is resting on 2 unfinished hammers right now. I forgot I have motion activated lights because I'm too lazy to grab my phone stand. And so what I've noticed recently is with the punch I made a couple of years ago out of sucker rod, which is 4140 or 01 tool steel, is when I've been punching through the eyes of my hammers, the tip has been getting ridiculously hot to the point where I have to strike just a couple times and then immediately pull it out, quench it off, put it in my punch lube and go back in. I've worked with H-13 punches before and I haven't had to do that. I've been able to strike 6 to 7 times and then pull it out, then quench, which is even better. Sometimes I'll just go straight from out of the hammer eye into my punch lube. But I'm working pretty big pieces of steel when I'm making hammers, and the punch I have right now, which is not cutting it, is made out of sucker rod. Sucker rod was typically made out of 4140 or 01 tool steel, which don't have any hot work properties. The tips of my punches were getting orange just by putting them into the hammerhead, and they were almost riveting. So they were almost, the faces of the punch were mushrooming over. So I'm just gonna buckle down and make myself a nice punch that won't happen with. I'm trying to think of anything else that I can say about it. It's just an excellent hot work tool steel. Other alternatives, that's right. Other alternatives for making punches are these. I just prefer this. I can get this stock. I actually got it on eBay. It's amazing what you can find on eBay. But other alternatives for this are sucker rod, which is typically made out of 4140 or 01. They're both excellent tool steels that have amazing properties, just not optimal hot work properties, but still amazing for punches if you're just beginning. Rebar, if you have nothing else. Now rebar is kind of an amalgamation of medium to high carbon steels, but if you can manage to get a successful heat treat on it, it's crazy. Oh right, heat treat, we'll talk about that in a moment. Another thing is coil spring. Large coil spring is excellent. I believe I actually have a punch or chisel around here made out of that because that's just what I had available to me at that time. Now, hardening and quenching, just heat treating the steel entirely. H-13 is also significant steel, seeing as it's an air hardening steel. So when you go to harden the punch, you don't quench it. Well, I mean, you do quench it, but you quench it by pulling it out of the forge and letting it sit in the air. It's an air hardening steel. It's called an air quench. Pull it out, let it cool to black, that was your quench. It's crazy stuff. I could delve into all the metallurgical properties of how it works and whatnot, but I'm sure I'd bore you all. Tempering is a little more difficult. We'll get into that when that comes time. But I guess for now, let's cut our stock and let's get the forge on, and I'll go over the process of how I forge out my punches. See you all then. All right, so I marked and measured at 5.5 inches just to give myself a little bit of leeway when forging this. Now I'm just going to nip it off with the angle grinder right there, and we'll clean up the end and then toss it in the forge. But when using the angle grinder, I just use hearing protection. It's just a smarter thing to do, as well as eye protection, obviously. All right, I'm going to cut that real quick. Be with you all in a moment. And right there is our punch stock. Alright, so I just went and gave both ends this slight chamfer on the 2" by 72" grinder. That's just going to help ensure that we don't get any fish slips or cold shuts when forging out the tip of our punch. I cold fit my tongs as always, so this is ready to throw into the forge. Alright, so we're going to start by taking our material straight out of the forge and have to tip the material straight over to the edge of the anvil. Try and find not too harsh of a corner, but just something slightly rounded. And then we're just going to be doing half on, half off blows, rotating 90 degrees, forging in a square taper to start with. Material's hot. Here's the anvil. Nice and deformed, 90 degrees. Now you can see we have our square like that, so now we're just going to make that into a square taper. Now, as the steel cools down, it becomes harder to move than the majority of steel. So the key to working H-13 is keeping it hot. So this might look hot enough for other steels, perhaps spring steels, maybe even some blade steels, but for H-13, back in the fire already. Alright, so we're on our second heat now. Straight to the forge, back and continuing to get in that square taper. Now you can see how our tip of the square is starting to thin out. That's what a taper is. Back at the fire. Alright, we're on our third heat now. Out of the fire, straight back onto the anvil. See how the tip of our square taper is already far smaller in diameter than the full diameter of the bar. So we're just going to continue that, try and elongate it a little bit more, and you know how it goes. Back in the fire. Alright, so this is heat number 4, and this will probably be one of our last heats on squaring up our stock. And we'll move to octagonalizing it, but now we're still just trying to get that taper nice and even. Now when tapering, you always want to be moving your hammer in the direction of which you want your taper to go. So, there we have our square taper. So the next step will be knocking down those corners and making it an octagonal taper. Back in the fire. Alright, so I think we're on our 5th or 6th heat now. So now all it is taking the corners of our square taper, striking down right upon them to create an octagonal taper. Just like that now. Now you can see that we don't have as sharp of corners near at all. In fact, there's like no corners, except for the octagonal ones we just put in. So next step is some pretty heavy octagonalizing back here. Tip is fine, tip is pretty near round, but I like to have the entirety of my punch be round taper. So I'll be doing some more heavy octagonalizing back here until the faces of the octagon are pretty equal with what the faces of the square taper are. Back in the fire. Alright, so I went ahead and did some more heavy octagonalizing off camera. So now it's just rounding. So I'm going to be striking while continuously rotating the piece like this in my tongs. Out of the fire, and rotate, and strike. Alright, so you can see how the steps from the curl lesson of squared, octagon to round directly translate to some aspects of toolmaking, because now we have a round taper. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to round the rest of this off camera until it's somewhere I'm happy with, and then I'll be back with you with the next step. Alright, hello. So I let the punch anneal in the forge, so now it's softer and a lot easier for grinding. Remember, it's an air hardening steel. When you're working with H-13, you can't just pull it out when it's hot and let it cool. That's just going to harden it. So you actually have to, in order to make it workable under a grinder, at least in my opinion, you have to put it inside of the forge and let it cool with a cooling forge. So today we're going to be working on the 2" by 72" Ameribraid belt grinder, working just at 36, 60, and 120 grit to prepare for heat treat. But all the work I'm doing right now can be accomplished on a 1" by 28" Harbor Freight belt sander or a 4" by 36" central machinery. You don't have to have a really nice, big, fancy bladesmith grinder. You can do this work with any belt grinder as long as you have the right quality abrasives. I think that's the biggest thing here. On something small like a punch, you don't ever have to really worry about, say, stalling the motor or creating too hot of a platen. Just gotta make sure that your belts are fresh, pretty much. So I'm going to take a couple passes showing you how to just rough in the profile of this punch, because right now this forged texture, if we were to punch through something, it would leave the imprint of that forged texture into the hole, and we want something that's a lot just nicer and just overall more circular. So I'll take a couple passes on showing you how to clean that up on the grinder, and then I'll do a little time lapse of just grinding this entire thing. And I'll also show you how to round off the edge. Because when you're striking the back end of a tool, even if it is hardened, the back end of this is still going to mushroom, so I'm going to show you a little technique / way to round off the end of your punches to prevent mushrooming as much. All right. I forgot to plug it in. Much better. All right. So the first thing you're going to want to do is hold your punch similar to this, or if you're left-handed like this, and go across the platen like this. And make sure you're always rotating it in your hands so you're not creating uneven flat spots. Clean up the end so it's, I guess, even. So you can see how on pass number 1, it's a little toasty. Pass number 1, we're just trying to work up to clean the profile. I'm always going to be rotating. You'll never see me stop and press in because this is a flat platen. It's going to adhere to the shape of that flat platen and create a flat facet here. You always want to be rotating up here. Now I do this on the flat platen, but you could do this up by the slack of the belt or in these little sections here where there is a tiny amount of slack. Sometimes I'll do that, but just for these initial 2-3 passes, I'm just going to be doing this, continuously rotating, occasionally adjusting the, I guess, face of the punch. I don't know what that's called. And then I'm slowly going to be moving it this way so that the grind eventually comes up to here. Basically, I want a smooth transition from what it is right now all the way up to the actual still remaining round stock. Alright, so I'm going to do a little time lapse and you'll see me just moving this grind all the way back to here and making it fairly even. Alright. Alright, I thought this would be a great time to let you know that you should all subscribe to the channel. Helps me out. Alright, so we have the profile of our punch ground. You can see got a couple spots with scale there. I'm sure those will clean up a little bit more once I go up to 60 grit and then 120. But it's nice, circular, pretty comfortable feel to it. Now I'm going to teach you how to grind the back end of this so it's not these sharp corners. Now the actual punch end's a little hot, so I'm going to punch that out. And still, this work's just being done on nice, sharp 36 grit belts. So, take it and you're going to hold it like this now. Start chamfering. Very, very heavy. 90, 90, chamfer at 45. Always rotate. Now, this in and of itself is a chamfer, and you could leave it like this. It's got a nice semi-radiused edge. It's just pretty sharp. I don't like that, but this would work for what I'm trying to do. I just like it to look a little bit more like this. So our next step is going to be chamfering at much sharper and more shallow angles, continuously moving it like this, and that's going to create almost like ball peen, but on the very end. We'll see. Now you'll see up towards the end there, what I did is I went onto the slack of the belt, where there's no flat platen here that's going to be creating flat shapes. You saw when I chamfered on the 45 that it created a facet that was very, very noticeable. Up on the slack of the belt, this punch adheres to that slack. It's like sanding with your fingertips versus using a sanding block. You're going to achieve a lot more organic shapes if you do it up here on the slack of the belt. I also used this little slack point here in between the bearing and the platen. So that, when I went like this, up on the flat platen, creates the rough profile of our end, and then cleaning it up here. And that creates this really, really nice, fully chamfered, with a tiny flat spot up top just for striking. I really like this profile on the end of a punch. I think it looks really, really clean. Now, typically I would go ahead and I'd clean up the majority of this punch. There wouldn't be this little bit of scale right here, and I'm actually considering, yeah, we're gonna clean up all of it. That's what we're gonna do. All right, I'll do that off camera, and I'll see you back when we all do that. So, as you can see, I've cleaned up the majority of the punch now. I still have some spots from forging that are just pretty deep. I don't really care about those. This is all going to look about the same texture after heat treat, because after heat treat we will come back and very lightly grind this, but it's going to develop a nice scaly texture. I just, for sake of mind, I like the look of a clean punch. Got a really, really nice taper going down into a pretty near perfectly circle punch face. Striking into the punches looking really nice and really clean. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to step up my grits, and I'm going to repeat pretty much every process, but at a 36 grit belt, which I believe I have one right here. Yes, I do. 36 grit belt, sorry, 60 grit belt, and then we'll go to 120 grit, and then we'll be ready for heat treat. Punches, you don't need to do any hand sanding, you don't need to do any Scotch-Brite, just 36, 60, 120. Alright, I will see you all when this is up to 120 grit. Alright, so we have our punch right here. We got a forged and flint, and I thought I'd take a moment before heat treat to show you why I'm making myself a new punch. This is the punch I've been using for the last 2-ish years. The head is ridiculously mushroomed, tip just continuously. I have to continue to regrind it. It gets hot. Sometimes I've riveted it into my pieces. It's just nasty, gross, and it's going to become my heavy, heavy work punch. So for my nicer punchings, things like that, I'm going to be using the one I just made. I have all of this up to 120 grits. I think that that's an appropriate grit, at least for the steel and for a punch to heat treat at. Like I said, H-13 is an air hardening steel, so we'll just put it in, let it get all the way up to past non-magnetic, pull it out, set it on the anvil until it hardens, or until it cools fully. Yeah, I was in need of a new punch, so I thought I'd make a video out of it, and this one turned out really, really nicely. I'm not too fussed about those little dark spots right there along the punch. That's not going to bother me much, but this is really comfortable to hold. I really love that radiused edge we have on the back there, and the overall profile of the punch is pretty near perfectly circular. So, have our tongs. So I'm going to set this in here, just right beside the burner. Just like that. And I'll pull it out once it gets hot, set it on the anvil, let it cool to black. That's how you harden H-13. The majority of steels require a water or an oil hardening, so you have to quench it in water or oil to harden it, but H-13 is one of the few air hardening steels. So I'll just pull it out, let it cool, and then that's hardened. And that's our punch fully completed. I'll probably run it back on 120, at least near the actual punch end. But other than that, it's done and dusted, and then I will we'll get a bar out some. I'll get something out, try and test it out and whatnot. But I'll see you all when that is ready for quenching. So here's our punch directly after heat treat. I went back and I cleaned up that just a little bit because I like the, I just like that a little shiny. So I have a little test piece in the forge that getting pretty hot. I center punched that, so I'll just be using that as a guide and testing the punch out. Here we go. That performs quite nicely. Yeah, I'm really liking that. Man, that just goes straight through it, doesn't it? Move that over the Pritchell hole. Plug's almost through. There we go. I think I heard it. Yep, I did hear it. And I mean, just like that, this punch held up, performed beautifully, and that is, I mean, wow, that does its job just fine. I'm very, very pleased with how this punch turned out and how it performs. I will definitely be using this on my hammers. Again, simple H-13 punch that we made. Hope you all liked the video. Hope you all subscribe, and maybe I'll do some more tool making content. I really enjoyed making this video. Here is our H-13 punch. That's all. Thanks. Bye-bye.